Now we're going to be joined by my friend, Dan Pfeiffer, who is writer of Message Box, a Substack you should all be reading if you are not already. I read it religiously. It gives such great guidance for messaging and how to also just talk to the people in your life about politics in this election in particular. It's super invaluable. But Dan was also a communications director for President Obama in the White House. And you may know him very well from Pod Save America and Crooked Media, and the list goes on. He also wrote a fantastic book about the need for pro-democracy media like Crooked and Courier. Dan, so stoked to have you on because we actually both have been so busy. We haven't caught up in a while.
I know it's been a long time. It's been a very long time, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for making time so few days out. So I want to get into it because I feel like every single week on the show and in your message box, we are both talking about the same thing ad nauseum, and that is the state of the media and legacy media in particular. A lot has gone on in this past week, right? With both the LA Times and the Washington Post transparently and crassly pulling endorsements
Mhm.
for the first time for president and the backlash of that, right? I think I read the updated numbers this morning in some Substack that they're estimating the Washington Post has now lost over 250,000
Yeah.
paying subscribers, which is they estimated around $10 million in annual revenue or more, which is a massive hit to a company that was already very much in the red under Bezos' rule. I actually wrote an op-ed that just published this morning on this on Courier about really the feigning relevance, in my opinion, of legacy media, not just in elections, but just in general. It's something we talk about a lot. And I just kind of want to hear your perspective. Were you surprised about the endorsement decisions? Do you feel like this is one of the final nails in the coffin for these publishers? Would love to hear your take.
Yeah, so I have sort of two discordant thoughts in my head. One is there is not a single voter in America who's going to be persuaded by a Washington Post editorial or Washington Post endorsement in a presidential race. I think in a local race, newspaper editorials, particularly in states with lots of ballot initiatives, can be influential. One of the things I'll do when I fill out my ballot tomorrow is I'm going to go pull up San Francisco Chronicle and others out here to look how they've talked about some of the ballot issues I hear. I mean, this is not even a new thing. In 2008, I argued vociferously that President Obama should not meet with the Washington Post editorial board, that it would be a waste of his time. And it succeeded in that, actually.
I remember that actually.
Yeah,
Even
people were very, very mad about it at the time. He also still got the endorsement and won Virginia. It still matters that billionaire owners of media outlets are kowtowing to Donald Trump. And I don't care what Jeff Bezos said. If you want to take a principal position that newspapers shouldn't endorse, I am totally fine with that position. But you make that decision a year ago and you announce it a year ago. You don't announce it 10 days out or whatever it is after the endorsement has been drafted and you've requested interviews with both people, right? It's like, it's very transparent what's happened here.
bullshit.
It's all bullshit. And so like that's concerning because it bespeaks a larger problem we've had, is that major stakeholders in this country have become overly comfortable with the idea of Donald Trump becoming president. We see that, there was that story in the Times a couple weeks ago about all these important business leaders like Jamie Dimon and Bill Gates who are for Kamala Harris but won't say it because they're afraid of backlash. Like, and this is how authoritarianism takes hold in a country: is the media, business people, stakeholders, other politicians bite their tongue to protect their own interests, and then it's too late. And so I find that very, very concerning.
And there's a term for that. I used it in my op-ed this morning. It's anticipatory obedience.
Yeah, that's right.
It enables and accelerates the
Mm,
pathway for authoritarian
mm,
power when
yeah.
people fall into line, essentially, especially in the press. It's deeply, deeply terrifying, in my opinion. And added to that, right, Bezos claims that there was no quid pro quo. It was pure coincidence that the CEO of his company met with Trump in Austin the day that the news broke that Washington Post would be pulling their endorsement.
And I'm really even willing to believe that that was a coincidence, that he did not know, but it does not obscure the fact that Bezos has massive business interests in space travel related DoD contracts at the same time that his major competitor is campaigning with Donald Trump. Whether the meeting has anything to do with the endorsement or not, the mere fact of his ownership of Blue Origin or whatever it's called bespeaks the motive for why this happened.
Yeah, and it was reported way long ago that Bezos was frustrated that Amazon lost massive government contracts in the Trump administration because of the Washington Post and beef Trump had with it. So just all of these things, you connect the dots, it doesn't matter really what they say. It's very clear the picture that's painted there.
Dan, I thought maybe it might be helpful to an audience that is not your usual audience. Talk a little bit about why you were involved in creating Pod Save America, right?
Yeah,
And sort of recap the theory of your book.
sure.
I think at this moment, it's sort of healthy to go back to sort of the origin of why we need pro-democracy media. And since you played such a central role in this, both operationally and theoretically, I think it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this today.
I worked for Barack Obama from 2007 to 2015. And over the course of that time, I watched from the campaign and from the White House the tremendously rapid rise of right wing media. Right, Fox existed, but it was not the Fox we know today. Then it became, and then Facebook took off, and just all we watched this asymmetry in the media where Republicans were and right wing figures were drowning out factual reporting, uh, real information, and being able to tilt the scales of politics the way they wanted. Which a fear that was then borne out in with tremendous consequence in 2016 when Trump was able to ride the wave of Facebook and Breitbart and all these other things to really spread mass amounts of disinformation. It was I'm not even counting all the things the Russians did. We can put that aside. Just the mere fact of how they operated in that space was dominant, and the Democrats had to do something about it. Pod Save America and Crooked Media were created as the beginning of an effort to push back on that, to create a progressive, pro-democracy counterweight to what we are seeing on Fox News, Breitbart, Daily Wire. And the media space is metamorphosized 55 times since we decided to create Pod Save America in 2017. But that's why it exists. And we're seeing two things happen at the same time. One is the rise of right-wing media and the decline of the reach and credibility of traditional media. And I think this election is the one that probably broke the old model of how communicating in politics worked. Trump will, if you don't count that weird Bloomberg thing that he stumbled into by accident, he will not have done an interview with a traditional media outlet in the last 45 days of the campaign or whatever it is, and probably will suffer no penalty for that. And so as traditional media declines and right-wing media continues to rise, we need to build up, this is something Tara and I have been working on together for a very long, since 2017, basically, ways in which we have an ability to tell our story to our voters on our terms, to push into the ecosystem content that pushes back against what the right wing is doing. Crooked started out was just Pod Save America, built more podcasts. We have big plans for what we're going to do over the coming years, no matter what happens in this election, because the lesson from what happened in Helene and all the other crazy conspiracy things that the right wing is pushing is that even if Kamala Harris wins this election, as I certainly hope and expect that she does, this is what she's going to be facing in the White House, and we have to continue to push back against it.
And one of the things, Dan, that's so important about what you've done and what Tara's doing and what I'm doing on a much smaller scale is that when she goes to the White House, she doesn't have the $1 billion campaign outside, right? The spectacle of all these rallies, the paid advertising, right? And so we go from being, where we get very competitive in the information space because of our new financial advantages and all the ads we can put on the air and the mobilizing the volunteers. But when she goes into the White House, right, she doesn't have any of that anymore. We're very competitive as a party when we have our big campaigns. When we don't have our big campaigns, they have an advantage. And that's part of what, the good work that you're doing and Tara's doing is try to close that gap, in my view.
That hits at a really important point, because what has changed in media is the distribution pipes of media are broken. And so that most of what all of us are doing all the time when we're watching like CNN or MSNBC or reading the New York Times is we're just participating in a conversation with the same group of people who've already decided who they're going to vote for. And it's the other voters who used to get political information osmotically, right? Either through picking up the newspaper to see what the baseball scores were, turning on the TV to see what the weather was, or for a long time, opening up Facebook to check on their friends' kids and getting news. No, that doesn't happen anymore. And so the real chasm in politics now is less right versus left, but politically engaged versus not politically engaged. And reaching those non-politically engaged voters from the White House without digital and television ads is almost impossible, absent like a massive effort on our part. And that's what we want to be a part of.
Yeah. And that is why I was so excited that you were able to come on, because I wanted to kind of bring this audience into just an insider conversation you and I would have anyway, that I've been dying to have with you since we haven't caught up in a while, which is, I agree with you entirely that I think that this is the last presidential election, right? That the traditional legacy media will even be perceived as having real influence. But will that also enable pro-democracy and progressive media and alternative media, frankly, but certainly media like COURIER, like Crooked, like others, to be able to get the wind beneath our sails that we have been struggling to get? Not that Crooked is struggling. I know you guys are killing it on everything, and we're certainly not struggling at COURIER, but we're not nearly at the scale we need to be in to really fill the vacuum that, Simon, you mentioned is going to exist, right? When the campaign is no longer around, either of the campaigns, and when people go back to their lives and hopefully all of our nervous systems calm down because
No.
Kamala Harris is president. But this has been a conversation you and I have had frustratedly over the years about just getting the level of education, attention, engagement, and investment, frankly, in being
Right.
able to really invest in this media. And my hope is that this kind of universal recognition that I hope everybody is coming to about the state of media and where it's going and where it is today will lead to that. And I'm not just talking about money for our companies, though that would be helpful, but I'm also talking about like more audiences embracing, right, this media. And I would just love your thoughts on that, because that's where my head is starting to go right now in a hopeful direction. Is like, okay, how do we pivot and how do we capitalize on this moment at Courier? We're in 11 states now. That's amazing. There's so much growth we can do in those states, but also we can be in, 39 others. So I just love to hear your thoughts on how we might do that.
A couple of things need to happen. One is the winds are at our backs in the sense that the way in which people consume information is changing, therefore making the economics change. Right. I mean, the 250,000 people who cancel their Washington Post subscription are going to spend their money somewhere, and it doesn't necessarily, probably won't be another legacy media organization. People are cutting the cord. Viewership is going down. There are just lots of ways in which people who want information are looking for it, and they're going to look for it in different places than they were before. So that's helpful in one way. The second thing we need Democratic Party leaders to more fully embrace progressive media. The only thing that I will ever say that Trump does well is that he fully understands the value of right-wing media. From the White House, he did everything he could to boost their audience, their reach, and their business, right? The example I always give is he understood how, because he's an old guy and he wrote Art of the Deal, he understands the economics of book publishing. And so he knows that if someone writes a book favorable to him and then he tweets that book onto the bestseller list, two things will happen. One, those authors will be on more TV shows. They'll get more media bookings. Two, the books will get moved to the front of the bookstore. And three, because everyone tries to recreate the last thing, the lesson will be pro-Trump books sell. We're going to go publish more pro-Trump books. And he would do the same thing. He would do interviews with the Federalist and Breitbart and all these people and bring them in and lay hands on them. And that is something that some members of the Democratic Party are very good at, but we still, and Kamala Harris has been better at it than some others, but it needs to fully understand that this is our future. That information warfare is politics in 2024 and 2025, and therefore you have to invest in it, and you have to invest your time and your energy and commitment to it. Because if people know that a good way to go see President Kamala Harris or Tim Walz speak, or a place where they can make news, is on progressive media as opposed to Reuters, that's going to be helpful to our audiences. I mean, the president did an interview with you, but we need much more of that from Democrats.
I am so glad you brought up this point, because I do think this gets to something that we always sort of lament about Democrats and progressives, is that they hold themselves to a certain moral bar that can get in actually the way and muddy the waters. Because the way that you described it with how Trump props up and embraces right-wing media, right? It sounds kind of grifty and icky, right?
Yeah.
But actually, it doesn't have to be at all. And that's not why we need Democratic electeds and candidates to embrace it. It's because it will reach more of the people they want to reach, their constituencies, their audiences that aren't tuning into traditional media, by showing up on these platforms. And I do want to give credit where credit's due. We did do an interview with the president. We have not gotten an interview with Vice President Harris, wink, wink, Harris campaign team yet, but our reporters have interviewed over 100 Democratic candidates and elected officials this year. And it was for us at Courier, over 5 years old, this year was a turning point. An absolute turning point in terms of people not only saying yes to the interviews from our reporters, because they've really established themselves in their states and in their state press corps, essentially, but also them coming to us. And even, campaigns like Colin Allred's in Texas, where we just have a nascent newsroom there that just got off the ground, but because of our national account. And so I do think we're turning that corner, but your point is so important, because I do think some people kind of are like, oh, it feels like icky, like we're doing a favor or something. It's like you're doing a favor to yourself by embracing progressive media and helping us build this infrastructure that's only going to help you deliver your message in authentic ways.
And when the calendar turns to the odd year, we need people to continue that commitment. Because I'll tell you what, in 2019 and early 2020 at Pod Save America, we were beating back Democratic presidential primary candidates to do interviews, right? During the midterms, and we love doing this, is candidates want to come on all the time because it's a great way to expose yourself to to raise money, expose yourself to activists, raise attention for your race. But then when it comes time to talk about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or something like that, we want them to have that same enthusiasm to come on. And people, there is like a mentality shift that our party has been just late to come to, which is the interview you do, the op-ed you write or whatever it is not really for the audience who subscribe to the thing you did it for. It is a piece of content that then your campaign or your operation or your communication then must take and distribute to your voters through all your channels, organic social, paid digital if you're in the campaign, giving it to all of your supporters and having them distribute it through relational organizing. And Trump gets this, right? He would tweet the articles out. If you just say, well, Courier has an audience of X, right? Without even getting into the quality versus quantity.
And
Cedar
judge it
Rapids
based on that
Gazette has
number.
X plus 12, right? Then why wouldn't we do the Cedar Rapids Gazette? But that's not how you think about it. How you think about it is that's the beginning of the process, and you have to focus on the distribution of that media. Because there are only two things in American media that are worth the time when you sit there. One is the Super Bowl interview, and the other one is a 60 minutes interview after a big football game. Everything else is reaching a fraction of the electorate and a tiny fraction of persuadable folks.
The other thing is, right, Courier, we're really focused on local. We have national now. It's really exciting, but it's really, really about local, where there is no local news in a lot of communities, and especially reaching the types of people we're talking about who are passive news consumers, who aren't watching cable news whatsoever. Most importantly, though, they're not paying through paywalls, which is where the only local news where this is. And so campaigns that stress over and they're like, oh, we have such a great local strategy. You're pitching and doing interviews with these traditional legacy state newspapers where they still exist, and no one is able to access them. And you better believe that the only thing most of the people you need to see that article or that interview are seeing is the headline. And that headline is usually intentionally skewed to be very clickbaity or both sidesy because of the publisher. And so it just, we have folks like candidates for attorney general or secretary of state or state legislative races who are upset with the fact that we have newsrooms in our states because they don't get any local coverage otherwise. So that's been helpful, but that has not yet quite bubbled up to statewide or federal.
Well, and I think, Dan, the other thing to build on your story that you've been telling, when I was at the DCCC in 2018, we brought in social listening tools to follow disinformation, to counter disinformation. It was the first countering disinformation operation that a party committee had set up. And it was still very crude in those days. But we could see during the campaigns that when Republican memes dropped, we could see them spread, right? And when we dropped stuff, they went for a day and died. And I think in part because the other thing they've done, in addition to this transition, is that they've created a consciousness of the need for regular people to amplify and to be part of the distribution mechanism itself. And part of the reason I think legacy media, if you think about what we're seeing now with this sort of rightward shift of the legacy media, CNN, Washington Post, LA Times, is that it makes no business sense because they're living in places with large numbers of Democrats. Younger people are more Democratic. There are more Democrats in the country than Republicans. And so the rightward shift is coming for reasons other than the long-term economic health of these publications or these news organizations. And in part, because I think what happens is when the New York Times has a piece that's favorable to Republicans, they just get more clicks because when it gets amplified through their ecosystems, whereas our stuff doesn't get amplified as much. And so there's also what I call this right-wing black hole that's absorbing all of the legacy media because they get more clicks from right-leaning headlines and, to your point, Tara, right-leaning content. And so part of our response strategically has to be to create in our audiences a greater awareness of the need for amplification, right? Because then when a story that's favorable to Kamala Harris, it gets through our ecosystems, right? And gets amplified. And they say, hey, we can make money by, writing stuff favorable to Kamala Harris, right? And not just on the other side. And so I do think the other piece we have to create, in addition to all that you're describing, is a greater awareness of people's role in the information war itself, right? To be information warriors for our democracy, to understand that they are critical actors, and that it's the full transition of the Democratic Party from broadcast age thinking, which is couch potato, top down, to understanding that in this media age, amplification and citizen amplification is so important to everything that we're going to do, because it supercharges the process that you've been describing earlier.
Yeah, that's very smart.
I don't know if anyone in our movement actually beats that drum
Mm.
more than the three of us right here.
I know,
So
I
Yes, yeah,
know,
yeah.
I
since
know.
I read both of your Substacks
Mm.
religiously, we are all talking. Sorry, Dan, please proceed.
No, I say that's exactly right. And the other just piece of that, in addition to amplification, I think is the most important, is we do have to help people understand that patronizing progressive media is a way to support the Democratic Party and support progressive causes, right? And that can be money, right? To be like to do the subscription tier at Crooked Media. It could be to subscribe to our Substacks, but it could also be as simple as following YouTube pages, right? Becoming a YouTube subscriber and help people understand that the more subscribers you have, the more likely it is that the YouTube algorithm will show your video to people. And so following, when we have to help people understand that that is a part of the process as much as giving $10 a month to the Wisconsin Democratic Party. As important as that is, but it's all of a piece.
And telling your follow, like if you share a Courier post on Instagram stories, which I hope everybody listening does, to say you don't follow Courier, right? That actually makes an enormous difference, is actually getting people in your life to engage with and support this media. It's so important. I can't have you on without bringing you into the conversation Simon and I were having earlier, given this big week. We were talking about the contrasting spectacles of the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign in general, but especially this week with his rally at Madison Square Garden, reminiscent of a Nazi rally there many years ago. And then Harris's in the Ellipse in DC, where Trump gave his speech on January 6th before his supporters stormed the Capitol. I would love just your quick take on those contrasting sort of visuals and spectacles, and how that plays out in the online decentralized media we've been talking about.
Look, you always want to end the campaign on a high note. You want to end on offense. And Trump has spent the last 3 days now on defense, right? It's a bit of fortuitous timing that on Sunday morning, Kamala Harris was in a Puerto Rican heavy neighborhood in Philadelphia laying out her economic plan for Puerto Rico. Trump has this rally, person makes this joke, and then he is scheduled to go to Allentown 2 days later, a town in Pennsylvania with a large Puerto Rican population, which then rains on his coverage. That we can talk how many persuadable voters will actually hear this. I think it's probably more than a lot of reporters assume, but what matters almost as much is the opportunity cost of taking 3 of the last 8 days of the campaign and spending them on defense. And I thought the event that the vice president had last night was phenomenal. It looked good. The message was good. The 75,000 people is this, you want a bandwagon effect here at the end. You want people to feel like this is a campaign that is getting momentum. It's one you should jump on. Most impressive and most important, particularly with people's image of the Trump rally in their mind, is that she laid out in her greatest detail yet what her new way forward looks like, what turning the page on Trump looks like. She's done the policy, right? We're going to protect and expand the ACA. We're going to build 3 million homes. So we're going to do the tax credit for first time. All of that is true. But when she talked about sitting down at the table with people she disagreed with listening to experts, because people are pretty skeptical in this political environment that a lot of policy is going to get done for them. Like they're pretty worried about things being taken away from them, like the Affordable Care Act or obviously reproductive freedom. We know what 4 more years of Trump looks like because we lived through it. It was a question what 4 years of Kamala Harris looks like. And she painted that in a way that I thought was a very good contrast to sort of the bombast and the narcissism and the hate and the division that came out of that rally.
Oh, it's such a good point. And it did. She spoke directly to the people who she needs to right now, who are exhausted and cynical about the divisive politics in this country, and said, I'm going to be a president for all of you, and not just in a cliche way, but like I'm going to actually bring people into my administration that have differing viewpoints. I love a robust debate, and also connecting the dots to that, where the people who disagree with me are not my enemy. Like this vengeful candidate I'm up against. Oh, I thought it was just really masterclass.
Well, and can I just say, we know from polling that independents, part of the reason people are independent is they don't like either party and they don't like the fighting, and they don't like the sense that Washington is perpetual warfare and that people don't get along with each other to do the people's business. And so she was going deep into sort of one of the core driving sentiments of independent voters last night in a very powerful way, I
And
thought.
non-voters.
Yeah, I mean, right. Non-voters, low information voters, low propensity, whatever the term you want to use, is that it was a direct appeal to sentiment that we see in polling. I mean, it's incredible looking at polling of people who are not affiliated, how much they believe the culture of Washington is broken, the corruption, the selfishness of politicians, and the greed and the personal corruption. So she did a phenomenal job, I think, going into something that Democrats don't spend enough time going there about reforming government, reforming the city, making the whole city work better. And I go back to my Clinton days, right, where we had this thing with, reinventing government, which was about making government work better, cost less. And it was a 8-year assault on this notion of this sprawling, corrupt city that we all live in. I thought, Dan, your point is really important. She did a great job in raising some of the most salient issues for voters that we just don't talk about enough, I think, as Democrats.
Well, thank you, Dan, so much for taking time. I know how busy you are. I really, really appreciate it. And for everybody listening and watching, please subscribe to Messagebox. I promise it will help get your friends subscribe, be a paying subscriber as well to all of our earlier points we made about supporting progressive media. And Dan, can't wait to debrief everything with you in a week or so. So thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me. Great to be here.